Good morning to you all. It's the middle of the night. My night off, and usually when working graveyard shift, when I have a night off, if I'm awake during that time, I will go and make a video. And here I am doing that at 3:28 a.m. in the morning. So, what do I want to talk about? I want to talk about politics. Never saw that coming, did you? I want to talk about the about politics going on down in Georgia. And Georgia, um, there are aspects about Georgia that's very optimistic, and then there are troubling aspects of Georgia. What's optimistic about Georgia is a political demographic change in recently. That Georgia became a purple state. I'm going to say purple state. I'm not going to say Georgia is going to turn permanently blue yet. But after years of Georgia being a reliably Republican state in elections, it's starting to vote for the Democrats. Now, I am not a Democrat and I'm not a Republican. And while I am an independent and I am very critical of the two party system, even somebody who is skeptical of the two party system, and I mean, like I am a registered Green Party member. I am going to look at Democrats being favored in a place like Georgia as something optimistic. Now, if I was for years and years and years ago when Georgia's voting consistently Republican, let's say you belong to the Constitution Party, which used to be called the U.S. Taxpayers Party, and you were down in Georgia, the fact that Georgia was voting Republican, you would have found that mildly optimistic. Even if you were not too trusting of the Republicans, you will look at that and be like, that's okay. And, somebody like myself on the left who looks at the Democrats and thinks that the Democrats are not as far left as I like them to be, the fact that Georgia started moving, um, at least on a symbolic level, center left, is something that I do find encouraging. Um, and in the year 2020, in the election, Joe Biden won the state of Georgia. For the first time, Georgia has voted for a Democratic candidate for president since they voted for Bill Clinton in 1992. And prior to that, Jimmy Carter in 1976 and 1980. Understandable why Georgia voted for one of their own, Governor Jimmy Carter of Georgia. But with regard to the 2020 election, although it was close, Joe Biden won the state of Georgia. And in early 2021, back in January, there was a special election in Georgia because there was a weird situation that there were two Senate seats available for election, and it kind of morphed into where it would be a special election in early January 2021, and that was between the then incumbents Republican David Perdue and then Republican incumbent Kelly Loeffler. David Perdue was facing John Ossoff, and Kelly Loeffler was facing Raphael Warnock. And both elections, this special election, were also very razor thin, close, but John Ossoff won, and Raphael Warnock won. It officially swung the Democrats back into controlling the Senate by a very, very thin margin. My understanding, 48 Democrats, 2 independents that caucuses with the Democrats, and Vice President Kamala Harris is basically the tiebreaker as far as party line is concerned. And so, and as I said, Georgia kind of turned blue, but one can call it purple right now because it, Georgia also has Marjorie Taylor Greene, the embodiment of insanity and evil all roll into one. So it's not like Georgia's turned into Vermont. Georgia is still a southern state, and the right wing and the conservative right wing mentality still runs amok in Georgia. That's not going anywhere anytime soon. And even many of the Democrats that are in there are not as progressive as one would find in, let's say, in New York or in California or some other place up north or in the or even some of the industrial Midwestern states where it's not so much left as in being woke, but left wing as in pro labor. You're not going to see that type of ideology be the centerpiece of the Democratic Party like I would like it to be. And I'm ranting on and on, and I need to get to the meat and potatoes of this. I'm sorry I sounded long winded. On March 25th, there was or the 26th, last week, a few days ago, Governor Brian Kemp signed a controversial bill, House Bill 531 by the Georgia State House, that a lot of people are calling, the new Jim Crow or election law. And what it does, it mandates that you have an ID for absentee ballot. It calls for all absentee ballot boxes to be indoors exclusively. No matter if hours at a place that has such ballot boxes for absentee ballots, um, even if hours conflict, let's say if a place closes at 6 p.m. at night and opens at 9 a.m. the next day, somebody who's not working traditional work hours won't get a chance to come there to put their ballots in. It eliminates early voting and shortens the absentee ballot time period 11 days before an election. And here's the big part that's controversial, that probably the most controversial part, controversial in its own way. No foods or drinks are allowed at lines for voting stations. Um, in a nutshell, this really is a voter suppression bill. Um, whether they're racist or whether they're even if it's not racist in the sense that one hates another race, but considering that the Republican Party is largely white and the Democratic Party is largely minority, even if the Republican isn't racist per se, it is a way to try to suppress the votes to prevent to make it harder for Democrats to win, because the the winds of change have taken place in Georgia. Now, if you can even take the race question out, let's say this is all in good faith by Governor Kemp, and he wants to go and have something what he thinks it would be a election reform to make it a clean election. I don't believe that, but I'm going to play devil's advocate, and just for the sake of argument, we're going to say that, let's say that Brian Kemp and the Republicans that voted for this garbage piece of legislation were acting in good faith, and there was no racism whatsoever involved. You still have a problem of disabled and elderly people who have mobility issues being able to take full advantage of the absentee ballots, yeah, or early voting. And that's a problem. When you have an election is supposed to be where everybody who's a registered voter, as often as possible, can go and vote. Now, for me, I wait till election day to vote. That's just me. I personally do not really vote. I personally do not do the absentee ballot or anything like that. And this is just me. This is just how I operate. I take politics so seriously, and it's so important to me. And I'm kind of bound by tradition in a way that you can call it. Um, Well, I'm not trying to compare politics to religion, but when in very liturgical uh, church traditions and churches, such as the Roman Catholics, the Episcopal Church, the Lutherans or Eastern Orthodox, and even some of the more mainline Protestant churches, that they have a method or liturgical way of worship. We're not going to say it's religious, but let's call it a civic liturgical obligation. I am bounded by tradition to wait until election day to vote. That's just how I operate. But there are people that work non-traditional hours, and there are people who are very busy with their lives. That is sometimes it's close to impossible to vote. And we're talking about people who may not be interested in politics all the time, but they know it's the right thing to do is to vote. And they should have every means available. I don't care what party you belong to. Everybody should have as the means of voting should be as available to you as often as possible, and it should be made as easy as possible. I personally would favor universal registration. Yeah, basically, wherever whenever you go and take care of something on a government level, you go ahead and you're registered to vote. That could take care of the ID problems. I wouldn't have a problem with IDs if wherever you go, they register you to vote right there. And of course, if you don't want to vote, you don't have to register to vote. So in that regard, if somebody asks for an ID later on, and when you go and vote under such a situation, there will be no you won't be able to have it so where certain people are going to be discriminated or disenfranchised in the process of. But I just think that it should be as available and as easy as possible to vote. Nobody ever talks about the biggest sham that exists in election laws, and that is suppression of third parties and independent voices too. Nobody ever talks about that, and that needs to be changed as well. But I can go into independent political action at another commentary. But I don't think it was in good faith. I think that this election law was meant to disenfranchise people of color. And I'm not into identity politics, but I do believe when I do think there's bad will being attempted, I'm going to call it out. And I do think that this was an example of trying to suppress people of color from voting. This was to signal out those who are poor and those who are disenfranchised in whatever way to do so. And I think that's what it's all about. One more reason I think about that is you like take a look at the election of 2018. There was a gubernatorial race going on in the state of Georgia between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams. Brian Kemp was the Secretary of State in Georgia while he was running as a Republican candidate for governor. Stacey Abrams happened to be very successful in registering tens of thousands of people in a very professional manner. And as the Secretary of State, it was a conflict of interest for Brian Kemp to be in that position and to be a candidate for governor. Yet that's exactly what happened. And I've seen this happen before with Secretary of States doing their conflict of interest. And that's what Brian Kemp did. He he made sure some of those ballots were tossed away. Now he was able to defeat Stacey Abrams. I am no fan of Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams is a corporate Democrat. She's close to the Joe Biden, Bill and Hillary Clinton model. She's no AOC. She is no Bernie Sanders. She doesn't have the politics of the squad. She doesn't have the politics of what it means to be a good progressive in the tradition of someone, let's say, like Elizabeth Warren or someone like the late Paul Wellstone. Um, she does not have that tradition. She's closer to the Bill and Hillary Clinton model, the Joe Biden model, the Barack Obama and Kamala Harris model, the Chuck Schumer model, the Nancy Pelosi model, the corporate Democrat model, the conservative Democrat. That is what she is. She's a conservative Democrat. No fan whatsoever of Stacey Abrams. She actually cozy up with Michael Bloomberg in last year's Democratic primary, who was arguably one of the worst Democrats in that primary that was running last year. And so anybody who thinks I'm playing partisan hackery, hang it up. You just might as well give up. I am not a fan of Stacey Abrams. She's far too centrist for me. But you know what? She's earned her right to be governor of Georgia. She won that race in Georgia, as far as I'm concerned. Brian Kemp cheated in Georgia, as far as I'm concerned. Brian Kemp is the illegitimate person that is occupying the seat over there in Atlanta at the governor's mansion. And I personally do not recognize Brian Kemp as the official governor of Georgia. There, I said it. As a Secretary of State, while he was in Georgia prior to becoming governor, he cheated. This has been done before with Secretary of States playing conflict of interest. Do you know who Kathleen Harris is? Kathleen Harris was the Republican Secretary of State in Florida under Governor Jeb Bush. That back in the year 2000, she did what she could to go and manipulate it to make damn sure that George W. Bush becomes president by pushing it to the Supreme Court, where there was already a right-wing majority in that court. It was an effort by Kathleen Harris, Secretary of State, Governor Jeb Bush of Florida, and the U.S. Supreme Court, which was already right-leaning, to not elect George W. Bush, but to select George W. Bush, to appoint George W. Bush into the presidency. That's why George W. Bush, as far as I was concerned, I did not recognize his presidency at all. And he was the worst person that's ever occupied the White House in my life. In some ways, worse than Donald Trump, even. So, a million people died halfway across the world because of George W. Bush. We were on the brink of the Great Depression because of George W. Bush. We had two lousy presidents after George W. Bush, who were both not as lousy as George W. Bush themselves. Well, they were pretty shitty too, and that's Barack Obama and Donald Trump. I have no use for Barack Obama. I have no use for Donald Trump. But George W. Bush is the reason why we ended up with an Obama and we ended up with a Trump. And as far as I'm concerned, um, the cheating that goes on, when people claim that the Democrats cheated and Biden is not really the president, whatever. You had a pandemic. You had a president who was kind of not taking the pandemic as seriously as he should have. And then you had a Republican control Senate that was an obstacle to progress. Where we only thing we got was a one-time $1,200 check that people like Mitch McConnell was thought was too generous, or people like Lindsey Graham thought that making $600 a week in unemployment, that people were being paid more to work than they were while they were working. And for which I would tell Lindsey Graham, fuck you, Lindsey Graham. I am glad that people, if they're going to be laid off, are going to be paid more to not work than to work their asses off and have a fucking asshole manager bark orders at them, making their lives a living hell and being paid less than $600 a week to put up with such bullshit. Yeah, good, good. Lindsey Graham, you heard me. Good, good. But anyway, um, what Georgia did this past week, shameful, shameful, shameful. It was shameful. Um, Returning to the Dixiecrat way. And for those who are not in the know, what I mean when I say Dixiecrat, Dixiecrat was a euphemism for Jim Crow Democrats in the South years and years ago, back prior to the Civil Rights Movement and a little bit during the Civil Rights Movement, that a lot of these people kind of crossed over into the Republican Party. That's why the solid Democratic South back in the days of Jim Crow, after civil rights, became a solid Republican South. And there are people that get offended when I say this, but it is the damn truth. I recommend, for those that would doubt me, I recommend reading the book "What's the Matter with Kansas" by Thomas Frank. Anyway, if you like what you heard, press like and comment. If you disagree, comment anyway. We'll have a conversation. Feel free to share the content on this channel. As a First Amendment absolutist, it's my duty to inform you to create a platform and utilize it because we're the muckrakers of our time. Remember also to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. And until next time, I am American Social Democracy. Peace. Class struggle yesterday, today, tomorrow, until we have full economic and social justice for all.